Welcome to Whistleblower Network News. I am your host, Jane Turner, FBI whistleblower and advocate. It is our honor to share with you these experiences of real life heroes and people of integrity. Welcome to Whistleblower of the Week, and today we have on someone who I'm very excited about. She is Kate Reeves, who's the International Liaison for Kohn Colapinto out of Washington, D.C. Kate right now is located in the UK, has worked with Georgina Halford Hall on the whistleblower bill, which is currently in front of Parliament. And she's going to explain to us about this bill, the process, the difference on how bills go through our government, how they go through in England. She currently, right now, is at Oxford, which is located in the UK. Welcome, Kate. We're just so excited to have you here today because this is really exciting what's going on in England.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, we've got our fingers crossed that we'll see some real progress soon.
And England certainly is trying to set the standard for whistleblowers, aren't they, with this Office of Whistleblower? Can you kind of explain what they're trying to accomplish here, who's behind it, and where it's at right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to back up a little bit, of course, as probably a lot of this audience knows, the US initially really set the stage with its passage of the Dodd-Frank Act, which allows whistleblowers internationally to report fraud and corruption to the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Commodities Futures Trading Commission in the United States. And it incentivizes whistleblowers with a monetary award if an enforcement agency levies a sanction over $1 million. And it also allows whistleblowers to report completely anonymously. So companies who are investigated or who are sanctioned may not even know that there's a whistleblower at all. And what that does is it completely changes the risk dynamic inherent in whistleblowing, and it has made the number of whistleblower tips received by these enforcement agencies in the US skyrocket. And anti corruption efforts in the US have majorly improved as a result. Now, as whistleblowers worldwide noticed these patterns, and we're facing a lot of retaliation in countries like the United Kingdom for reporting, for standing up and doing the right thing, whistleblowers started going to the United States instead of to UK enforcement agencies because they had more rights and more protections there. And the United States treated whistleblower tips, particularly in the white collar crime sector, as a matter of enforcement, of an anti corruption enforcement, rather than an employment dispute. Right now, that's not the case in the UK. The UK whistleblower regime is currently basically under the framework of the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which is under the acronym PETA. And what PETA does is it basically treats whistleblowing as an employment issue. Whistleblowers are made to go through a really arduous process in an employment tribunal where less than 10% of cases end up successful. These whistleblowers have to reveal their identity while going through that dispute. They put themselves at a lot of risk. They can only take the issue to the court after being retaliated against. So there's really no option for, no channel for enforcement without first being retaliated against. And it's very rare that whistleblowers receive compensation at all. And when they do, it's often not adequate for the years of time out of work that they've had and the large sum of attorney's fees that they've had to pay. So that's kind of the framework that we have. And I think what started happening recently in the UK is that the leaders of different enforcement agencies and of whistleblower advocacy organizations have started to notice how many whistleblowers in the UK are going to the US to report. Between 2012 and 2021, which was basically about the decade after the Dodd-Frank Act was passed and before the SEC stopped publishing the breakdown of country data for the Dodd-Frank Act. In those 9 years, whistleblower tips from the UK alone were above 700 and
Wow.
resulted in a really large sum of monetary sanctions that then US taxpayers mostly benefited from, as opposed to UK taxpayers where this corruption was mostly taking place. And so folks like the current leader of the UK Serious Fraud Office, the SFO, have noticed this pattern and started being vocal about the fact that UK should really start modeling systems like the US Dodd-Frank Act. Simultaneously, there was a really large research investigation done by Eliza Lockhart, who's a researcher at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, which is one of the leading think tanks in the United Kingdom and one of the oldest in the world. And Eliza interviewed whistleblower advocates, attorneys, whistleblowers themselves, other folks in the anti-corruption space for over a year, I believe, about a year, maybe just under, and basically came out with this report that advocates for the UK to implement a whistleblower reward system, maybe not directly, but essentially says whistleblower rewards work. And I think a lot of the UK whistleblower organizations have started to fall in line with that. There's certainly been a lot of debate because the UK culturally seems to be more resistant to the concept of paying whistleblowers, and that's something we can talk more about. But Whistleblowers UK, which is led by Georgina Halford Hall, has been for years behind the movement of opening up an office of the whistleblower, which is a really critical part of getting a reward system to function at all. And I think there's still debate among all the organizations, including Whistleblowers UK, about whether rewards would fit into that framework. And I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody from any of those organizations, but either way, having a distinct office is crucial for any next step in whistleblowing, because it would allow whistleblowing to be treated as its own problem, as an anti-corruption problem, and not require a whistleblower's case to only be investigated once the whistleblower has been retaliated against.
Now, Kate, that is really interesting. Tell us why the UK has a problem with paying their whistleblowers. I don't understand that, and I don't think most Americans do, especially for all the sacrifices that a whistleblower gives.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that the narrative against paying whistleblowers, and this is just my gut reaction, not, I don't know if this is data backed, but this is just the sense I get. I think that the narrative against paying whistleblowers is very much articulated by folks who stand to lose from paying whistleblowers, and it's something that is very easily grasped by the public. I think when somebody hears from, the mainstream media that an executive in a large corporation who's already making a lot of money has recently gotten a multi-million-dollar award from whistleblowing, it's easy for somebody to say that is so unfair. That data can easily be presented as, here's rich people becoming richer. The reality that's not presented often in that data is that those rewards are necessary to get people who are often a little bit complicit in corruption to come forward. It provides a safety net. It incentivizes folks who maybe otherwise would not report corruption. And the data for me that's important to focus on is not the fact that a whistleblower is getting this huge sum of money. but the effect that the payment of whistleblowers has on the total recovery of fraud over time, which ultimately brings much more money back into taxpayers' pockets.
Yes.
And so I think it's this concept of paying whistleblowers is very uncomfortable to a lot of people who don't understand the data and the economics behind it, which makes sense because it's not something that is typically explained to people. But the folks who do understand it are the corporations who are committing fraud. And so
Hmm.
what I have witnessed and I why this is my guess of how this narrative is created is I've witnessed um, corporate whistleblower programs promote the idea that the payment of whistleblowers is not necessary. What we need to do is create better internal reporting mechanisms. And the data shows very clearly that internal reporting mechanisms do not protect whistleblowers. In fact, probably 6 months or so ago, we at KKC ran a study of all of the data from the Dodd-Frank Act and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US and found that over 90% of whistleblowers who were retaliated against reported internally. In fact, 95% reported internally. 5% of that had reported both internally and externally to the government, and 90% had reported only internally to their corporation. And so it's clear, it's very obvious when you look at the data that if a corporation knows your identity, if a corporation can deduce who you are, if they have your information, they can retaliate against you easily, and they can create other reasons for firing you that are not related to your whistleblowing. And they can keep committing fraud, and they can keep taking money away from people who deserve it through their fraud and through their corruption. Whereas when folks have the option of reporting to a government, they don't make these risks, and companies stand to lose, and they understand that. And so I think that is where that concept comes from is what's being funneled through corporate leaders. But I also think it's a narrative that can change pretty quickly. In the United Kingdom, there have been a lot of recent whistleblower scandal or recent corruption scandals where if whistleblowers had been listened to, or if a whistleblower had come sooner, um, it wouldn't have happened. There was in the NHS, the Lucy Letby case, who's a nurse
Yes.
who killed multiple babies. There's the post office scandal, which is going on for multiple years, and where multiple innocent public servants were wrongly put in jail, and
Hmm.
um, regular citizens lost a lot of money. And so you can see if there was a different system in place that functioned better and rewarded whistleblowers, perhaps there would have been a different outcome.
I think that's a brilliant analysis. When I was over there, they were explaining to me that culturally, they felt that it was a person's duty to come forward and tell the truth, which is like committing suicide. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
We all know what happens to whistleblowers, and England has some terrible examples. I think we interviewed Jonathan Taylor, and that's on one of our podcasts if people are interested in listening. And he absolutely got destroyed,
Mhm.
and he saved millions and millions of dollars. So there's obviously something wrong with their system. And those two cases that you pointed out, three, are really good examples of why they need it so desperately. So tell us how this Office of Whistleblower allegedly is going to run. How's it going to be set up?
I think that's where a lot of the debate still is. So there's one
Ah,
proposal that has been created by the bill that's been written by, or largely supported by Whistleblowers UK. And to my understanding, that bill has been read a couple of times and needs to be read another time, although I'm not positive about whether there are any updates. with the change in government a few months ago. However, the concept that Whistleblowers UK is putting forward is that there would be an independent office of the whistleblower, similar to how the US has whistleblower offices within different agencies, except rather than being within a certain agency, this office would be entirely its own, and it would receive whistleblower reports related to fraud and corruption, related to other public interest issues like sexual assault, and there would be investigators in that office charged with investigating whistleblower claims and protecting whistleblowers. Um, I think some of the suggestions that were put forth in Eliza Lockhart's article discussed how it's okay for the invention of a whistleblower program to be a running work in progress. It doesn't need to come out, first bill, first piece of legislation, or first attempt being complete. There can be small steps taken at a time, and the program should be, she recommended, tailored to a specific type of crime that the public views most important and that whistleblowers can most address. So if, for instance, in the US, our whistleblower programs are most tailored to fight corruption, and that's what the data on the incentive program, the monetary incentive program, has really demonstrated that it works in that category. The US is weaker when it comes to public whistleblowers in government sectors, Jane, you know that well, and weaker when it comes to like a government investigation for something like sexual harassment, which are issues that Whistleblower UK is trying to think through. They're also trying to think through how the UK should deal with NHS whistleblowers, which again is an issue that the US has not really navigated, given that we don't have a parallel system. So those are all questions that are being raised, and there's still a lot of debate about whether to create this one office, whether to start small and have offices within things like the SFO or the UK's FCA, or other offices within the UK government. And for the aforementioned reasons, there's still a lot of debate again about the role that rewards would play in those offices.
Right. But, from my understanding, the office of the whistleblower has some powerful politicians behind it. I'm thinking of Baroness Susan Kramer.
Mm-hmm.
And is that the one that appears to be taking the lead in terms of the one everybody wants? Or are there several other ideas that have come to the forefront?
I think that the issue is less that there's two different proposals or multiple different proposals currently on the floor, and more that there's one that's actually in a bill, which is the Office of the Whistleblower Bill. That seems to be the only one with a concrete, far along bill that's out there being discussed, whereas some of the other potential solutions are just in the discussion stage right now. And I think the resistance to the Office of the Whistleblower Bill that does exist isn't currently in the form of an opposition bill, but in the form of people just raising questions about it. So they're still working through the kinks, I think, in that way.
So could you explain to us, Kate, um, there some people would say the House of Lords is like the Senate and the House of Commons is like the Congress.
Yeah.
Can you tell us their political setup and where the bill is at right now for the Office of Whistleblower in that process?
Last time Georgie and I spoke, it was on its second reading. But and that's yeah, it still says that's where it's at online. Um,
So
but I
how
don't know how the change in government affected that.
Yeah, and that's a big difference, isn't it? This change of government, because I
Mhm.
believe the conservatives are out and labor is in.
Mhm.
So that's a big deal when you have a whole change like that.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the House of Commons and the House of Lords work, or are they exactly like our political system?
I think they're pretty similar. It's like a bicameral system in the same way. So the bill has to go through both houses. And in both houses, there has to be a first reading, a second reading. Then it goes to the committee stage, which is where it's discussed in committees, and then the committees report out on it. And then there's a third reading. And then the final stages are there are consideration of amendments, and then instead of like a president signing, there's royal assent. Um, so it's still like the Office of the Whistleblower bill is still just in the second reading of one house, as far as I can tell, the House of Lords, and hasn't yet been considered in the House of Commons.
Ah, can you tell us, Kate, what the chances are that this would actually be instituted? Is there a good chance? Is it bucking headwinds?
I think that there's a good chance some version of an Office of a Whistleblower bill will be instituted in the near future. I don't know what the odds are. I have no idea what the odds are of it being this specific bill or this version of this specific bill. But I do think that there's a lot of momentum for an Office of the Whistleblower in the UK. And I think the Rusi report has really contributed to that and to a better understanding of the role that rewards play, how crazy it is, this notion that it's a whistleblower's duty to report, and
Oh, yeah.
that the public can rely on people acting out of their duty and righteousness
Yes,
step up
yes,
when faced with all of this personal risk, career risk. I mean, whistleblowers have their families retaliated against. There's all these crazy stories, and you've revealed many of them through your other podcast guests, so we don't need to go into it. But whistleblowers go through everything
mhm,
when their identity is revealed, and so the UK is starting to come to terms with that, and with the idea that there needs to be a different system. And there's people in the government who are championing that, which is really important. Um, and so I think we'll see hopefully some version of that come to fruition soon. And there's also a huge monetary incentive for the government because they see the large amount of financial recoveries that come from UK whistleblower reports into the US government simply because it's so effective, and they want that money to stay in the UK. And the UK is currently the money laundering capital of the world, so it has no
yes.
shortage of corruption and financial crime that it can recover, hopefully, if they make a properly functioning whistleblower system.
And Kate, is it true that these people who submit to under the Dodd-Frank in the United States, the money has to pass somehow through our banking system, or does not have to?
Yes, in the US, in any of the US whistleblower bills, there needs to be some kind of tie to the US. So for the Dodd-Frank Act, it's targeted at protecting investors. And so the tie basically needs to be that a US citizen could invest in a company. Usually that's done by the company being on a US stock exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange. Sometimes a case can be made if it's on a foreign stock exchange and US citizens have open access to that stock exchange and invest in it because therefore fraud in that company could harm US investors, which gives the SEC jurisdiction over it. Some of the other whistleblower laws or laws through which sanctions are are levied via the Dodd-Frank Act, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, has been in existence since the 70s, but post Dodd-Frank really became a whistleblower law. And the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act targets bribery by those acting on behalf of companies to public officials. And under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the definition of a US company is also very liberally interpreted. And it's basically also anybody who can invest in that company. And then in terms of commodities, often any commodity that will impact the price of that commodity in the US market. So a commodity could be traded in between Switzerland and Brazil, let's say, and not reach the US. But if there has been fraud underlying that exchange or bribery that allowed that to happen, there's a potential argument to be made through which it would affect the price of that commodity in the US if it is drastically cheaper or something like that, in which case the Commodities Futures Trading Commission could have jurisdiction over that instance of corruption.
So there's a lot of areas that whistleblowers could file here in the United States if they're in the UK or
Yes,
really any other country in the world. It
exactly.
seems like you're saying it's wide open for them to file here in the United States if anything touches us in any format like
Yeah,
you've just laid out, which
totally.
is kind of wide open. So England or the UK has noticed that all this money that smart enough whistleblowers, they do file with Dodd-Frank, are getting, and they're not seeing a cent of it, are they? These
Correct.
are UK citizens filing whistleblower cases, getting sometimes huge sums, and
Mhm.
the UK is not getting a cent of it.
For the most part, yeah. There's occasionally instances where the US enforcement agencies give foreign countries a portion of what's recovered if foreign investigators are cooperative, but that's not necessarily guaranteed. And again, it's a much smaller sum.
Oh, so the United States does, out of the goodness of their heart, to maybe give a piece of the action to a foreign country if they feel like it.
Right,
And
basically.
they're helped by the investigators, it sounds like, from that country. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
Yeah. So here in the United States, Kate, they ran a survey that found that a huge proportion of the United States population believes in whistleblowers, supports whistleblowers. Do you think if they ran or have they run that kind of survey in the UK to find out how supported whistleblowers are there? Hi, we'll be right back with more of Whistleblower of the Week after a quick message from one of our whistleblower friends. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, this is Austin Handel, known on social media as Officer Ash, but also known as the Dunwoody Whistleblower, and the Vice Chair of the Lamplighter Project. The Whistleblower News Network strives to be the best source of information on important whistleblower stories. In addition to in depth interviews with whistleblowers, Whistleblower News Network provides timely coverage of breaking whistleblower news, detailed analysis of whistleblower legislation, court cases, and exclusive investigative reporting on government whistleblower programs. Subscribe to the Whistleblower News Network to stay up to date on all things whistleblowers.
Basically, as of 2021, research from YouGov highlights that UK workers, um, among UK workers, 76% of them want to see all employees have whistleblowing standards in place.
Oh,
I think that doesn't necessarily tell us what they think about rewards specifically.
yeah.
And I would also guess that that number has increased since 2021, given everything that has happened and come to light, where whistleblowers could have potentially prevented um, major instances of corruption and scandals. Um, but I think that the issue in the UK is less lack of support for whistleblowers themselves and more a really severe lack of understanding for what it is that whistleblowers go through and what exactly could be prevented if there was a different mechanism in place, and how effective rewards are at stopping some of these major issues that the UK is having a really challenging time with.
Yes, there's certainly been some incredible scandals that have come out of there, and you mentioned some of them. But, do you think it would serve one of the whistleblower agencies who support them to run that kind of poll to see what kind of support they have?
I'm sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's can you tell me why the UK is like the highest money laundering country? Is there a reason for that? And could it possibly start with an R and be Russia?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I think particularly in London, you see a lot of oligarchs buying up huge swaths of property. There's
Right.
neighborhoods in London that you can walk through, and all the lights are off. And it's kind of sad, actually. It's some of the nicest, most historic neighborhoods, and you walk through, and it's just kind of desolate because so much of the homes in those places are owned by people who don't actually live there and are solely owning the property um, to to launder money. Um, and that's a huge example of something that has really severe consequences on people who live in London because that behavior has jacked up the prices of rent in London, all caused by the supply demand market of economic actors who, again, are not actually residing in London and who are buying property for um, but like illegally motivated reasons. And
Yeah.
if there
Yeah.
were more effective anti-money laundering law that relied on whistleblowers to expose these huge money laundering schemes, it could benefit a lot of property owners and rent payers in London.
Right. And that's a wonderful reason to support whistleblowers. I mean, look what is happening there. Like you said, it's affecting the property values, the property issues. Why is this is a question I have to ask. Why does the UK government allow that? I'm just stunned at the amount of money that's pumped through there by Russia and the oligarchs, not only from Russia, other countries. Why is the UK government allowing that?
You'll have to ask the UK government.
I suppose I would. And whistleblowers probably could give us the reason, couldn't they?
Right, right.
And but who is willing to take on the Russian mob or any other mob? I mean, especially when
I mean,
you
the reality of the situation is that there's a lot of really advanced strategy that those who launder money use in order to do things like buy property and get dark money to become legal through things like buying homes or other mechanisms. And the reason whistleblowers are so important is because as a public official, as a government auditor, it's really, really hard to follow these schemes, to know how to identify them,
right,
unless you have the inside information. And
right,
the people who have that inside information are people who, like I mentioned before, are maybe a little bit complicit. Like you're not going to get the inside information on a money laundering scheme unless you're at a job where the company
mm-hmm,
is doing a money laundering scheme.
mm-hmm,
And so likely there's going to be things that you've had to sign off on in the past or conversations that you've been a part of that have been in gray legal areas or that you realized crossed the line before, and for some reason now is the time that it crosses the line too far and you decide to step forward, or maybe you haven't even been complicit yet, but regardless, you're in this situation where
right,
you're working for a company, they're doing something wrong. It's clear that if you're going to report that information, you would risk your job if
right.
They knew it was happening. That job is probably a really lucrative paying job. And the people in those jobs don't just, drop that salary on a dime. Like they have to know that there is some kind of financial safety net in addition to a physical safety net, such as
Right.
anonymity. And so rewards become vital for getting the kind of information that auditors don't know on their own. Like the reason why the government, if we're being serious, the reason why the government doesn't prosecute these crimes is because they don't have the information without whistleblowers to do so.
Bingo. Bingo. Yeah, bingo. And this is what just blows my mind, Kate, with this idea that in England they feel it's your duty to just stand up and,
Yeah, yeah,
tell the truth.
right.
Where else in the world would that work? This is why that's very puzzling to me. Here
Hmm.
you have somebody whose very life may be,
Yeah.
threatened if they come forward. And, there's this idea, well, it's your duty to do it. That's just crazy to me. I
Hmm.
mean, can you see any logic in that?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And so I'm always stunned with that idea. But I think, like you said, with this report, they're trying to change that. Where do you think the future of whistleblowing in the UK is headed?
I am really encouraged by how motivated the current director of the SFO is to mimic the US programs, Nick Graves. And he has been really vocal about criticizing exactly this idea that you just said, how crazy it is that we expect people to just report wrongdoing out of the benevolence of their heart when they stand so much to lose. And
Oh,
when it's clear right now from the data that people aren't doing that, right?
no,
Like it's not happening. It is happening in the US. UK whistleblowers are going to the US because these protections and financial
are
incentives are
there.
in place. And so, as the SFO director, Director Graves really wants to implement a program that he sees as effective. And I think often the political legislative process can be really slow, but
Right.
the when you have like leaders of agencies and offices, existing offices behind change, um, often that can mean that the change will happen faster, because you have people who are doing the work, advocating for it, who can say that in order to make my program run more effectively, we need to have this bill. And that's really compelling, I think, for lawmakers and hopefully will get the UK somewhere soon.
Tell us what SFO stands for.
Yeah, Serious Fraud Office.
And is that located in the government?
Yes, it's kind of like their version of the Securities Exchange Commission.
So the gentleman that heads that, is he in the House of Lords or the House of Commons, or is he just a regular
No,
person?
he's like a civil servant.
Civil servant, and he's really behind a push to
Mhm.
to get this established or to help whistleblowers.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And tell us, Eliza Lockhart, what
Mhm.
organization does she belong to, or can people obtain the work she did on
Yeah,
whistleblowing?
so she is a researcher with the Royal United Services Institute, which is a think tank, and they have a really long history of bridging research and government. As the name suggests, they used to be affiliated with um, the Royal Palace, and I think have
Oh,
some government affiliation still, although I'm not sure exactly what level it is. Um, and
did,
so her report is publicly accessible, and I'm sure we can find a way to put the link somewhere in in the description for
no,
the podcast.
that would be great if we could get a link to that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would be interested in seeing because, from the sounds of it, this is very crucial and important to where the whistleblowing bill is at right now, and in terms of how the public is seeing it. which seems to be a big hill to get over. I don't understand
Mhm.
that, but I guess here in the United States at one time, whistleblowing was not seen as a, admirable thing. That has changed. But maybe they're just,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think Eliza mentioned something in the launch of her report that I have heard other folks say, both in the US and abroad, which is that there's often this assumption that in order to get a bill, you need to change the culture, which is completely false.
uh-huh,
Often you need to get a system in place and the change in culture will come with it. Like this concept that the culture of wanting to pay whistleblowers and celebrating whistleblowers, the idea that that existed forever in the US is not entirely accurate.
right,
There's been, resistance and a lot of retaliation against whistleblowers in the US for a very long time. And I think the idea of paying whistleblowers would have shocked a lot of people, and probably still would because I think a lot of people don't even realize that it happens. Um, but it does happen, and it's a huge success. And I think for the people who work in the whistleblower advocacy space, that
yes.
caused a really clear understanding that this works, this is how it should be, this is a good thing.
I totally agree with you. And do you think if the office is instituted in the UK, that other countries would also fall in line? Is that a possibility?
I hope so. And I think there's a lot of countries who are also thinking about it. I know folks in Mexico have been working hard on trying to conceptualize what an office of a whistleblower would look like there. Stephen Kohn has met with representatives in countries all over the world on how it would be possible to set up whistleblower offices and whistleblower programs in distinct nations. The only issue and only obstacle, I guess, is countries really need, like, if you're a whistleblower who's trusting your government rather than a corporation with your identity, you need to be able to be sure that the
Yes.
government is not crazy. You're not you're not going from one corrupt entity where you would put yourself at risk to then another. So you need to be able to trust the government. The government needs to be separate. Those who are investigating need to be completely separate than the corporate entities. And so, as long as those things are in place, which is a pretty high bar, um, then there's a whole set of best practices that Steve has recommended in terms of how one can set up a whistleblower office, which he writes about in his book and which are available on the KKC website.
Yes. On the KKC website, Kohn and Colapinto. And of
Hmm.
course, Stephen Kohn is a senior partner there and has traveled all over the world helping people institute these things. And you've been with him on several of these trips, so you definitely know what you're talking about. I want to ask you, this is not a gotcha question, but can whistleblowers trust the UK government?
I think part of the issue right now with why whistleblowers have not gone to the UK government is because there has been a lack of trust. So the way things stand right now, there is a reporting mechanism available for the SFO, for instance, and the UK FSA, which is like another one of their, it's the Financial Services Authority. It's another one of their anti-corruption investigative authorities. Um, and whistleblowers either don't report to begin with, or when they do report, find that the reports have often been mishandled
Mm,
or not thoroughly investigated. And a lot of anecdotal whistleblower responses to this have suggested that perhaps the reason is that the SFO and SFA are both simultaneously tasked with auditing and then under like this particular reporting mechanism with investigating. And so it's the same folks because there's no resources like for a distinct office of the whistleblower. in these entities, like there is for the Securities and Exchange Commission or CFTC in the US. It's the same people who are being the auditors and the investigators of certain companies or certain corporations. And to be an auditor kind of requires that you have rapport with the corporation.
Right.
Often they're people who came from the private sector who
Hmm.
maybe worked for these corporations themselves. They have personal relationships with people who worked there. And so there's a huge lack of trust among whistleblowers as it currently stands, coming to those auditors and asking them to investigate. And whistleblowers who have done that have found that the auditors who then put on the hat of investigators often like take the company's word for things that maybe they shouldn't. Again, this is a lot of anecdotal things that I've heard
Right.
at
Right.
conferences and such in the UK where whistleblowers share their stories. Um, but I think the answer to that and something that can restore trust is creating that independent office because that's essentially what was done in the US. And it created a barrier. It tasked independent investigators um, to be really deliberate about the ways that they carry out investigations so as not even to reveal that there is a whistleblower to begin with. And there's all sorts of very skilled strategies that investigators can learn and specialize in to do that. For instance, if a whistleblower is the one person who is in possession of an email that is, demonstrates a crime, the investigators are not going to go to the company and say, we have the email, we know you did this, because that
Yeah.
would then put the whistleblower at risk.
Right.
Instead, they would basically tell the company that they're being audited for X, Y, and Z and subpoena them and ask them to produce this particular piece of evidence or produce all of their emails or whatever it might be. And if they don't produce a certain set of evidence that they now have because the whistleblower has given it to them, there's further steps to take from there. But there's tactics like that specialized investigators can learn. And that doesn't happen when you have this blur between an auditor, an investigator, and frankly, just a really overburdened set of public servants to begin with who are doing way more than they should.
Do you expect that there's going to be further scandals? I mean, the health service, the postal service, these are massive, massive scandals. Um, I know Jane Sr. was one of the whistleblowers for the grooming gangs, which is a massive scandal and is in the news now. And she was brave enough to come forward, and it cost her just a huge amount of personal safety, money, time. And what do you foresee for the future for the UK? Are these scandals going to continue? Or, excuse me, do you think implementing the whistleblower office may head off some of those in the future?
Well, first, just to be clear, I think there's still can't be sure about the office. Fingers crossed, but nothing's set in stone. And
Right.
so hypothetically, if the office were implemented, I think there would certainly be less scandals. I don't think it would stop bad things from happening. Certainly, these things are happening everywhere. They still happen in the US. There's still really intense and intricate corruption scandals that are revealed in the US, but certainly there's been a proven deterrence effect of the whistleblower laws and whistleblower regime in the US. And I think that if it were implemented in the UK, we could expect to see similar results and hopefully it would decrease some of these major major flaws and scandals in the
Yeah.
NHS and in the government, other areas of the government, um, in the UK.
Yeah, because most of those scandals what they're known for is the fact that they went on for so many years.
Right.
And
Right.
if you'd had a whistleblower, it might have cut it off a lot sooner.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can you give us some closing comments? We'll look forward to having the reference on this podcast for Eliza Lockhart's research. But we're particularly interested in your thoughts. Do you have any closing thoughts for us? And I want to thank you for being an advocate and such a huge supporter for whistleblowers. You've been out there, you've been in other countries, you've been at National Whistleblower Day. I mean, you've been there for whistleblowers, and you're working now in the UK with these whistleblower organizations, leaders, Georgina Halford Hall, obviously the people in the UK government. You are such a supporter, and we have to thank you for that. Do you have any closing comments for us?
Absolutely. I think I would just like to end on one of the observations that Eliza highlighted in her article, which is the notion of prioritizing the message and not the messenger. So much
Oh,
of the rhetoric around whistleblowers and the debate around whether to pay whistleblowers focuses on just that, on the whistleblowers themselves. And that's not really what's important in that debate. What's important is the information that whistleblowers have and what it can do and what it can prevent. Um, and I think it's much easier for individuals to dwell on the financial reward that one person who's not themselves gets, or the way the complicated history of one individual. But many whistleblowers are not perfect, and the reality is that they have information the public needs. That could be information that prevents many deaths in the NHS. It could be information that prevents huge money laundering schemes in the UK. I mean, the largest financial recoveries from whistleblowers in the US have revealed hundreds of $billions worth in money laundering. Like, we are talking no small crime. Whistleblowers have information that ultimately are going to save citizens costs on property, on if it's pertaining to commodities, on, everyday goods, on you name it. It can pertain to safety on the internet, safety at the airport, safety in public transportation. So many realms of issues are protected or could be protected, or vice versa, are at risk by the information that is held and given, or held and not given by whistleblowers. And so the choice comes down to whether we want to prioritize that message. And the way to prioritize that message is to get it out of the messenger. And so that is what I'd like to end on. And I would really encourage everybody to read Eliza's report. I think it's really compelling and goes through a lot of the evidence and really shows how irrefutable this notion that whistleblower rewards work is.
Kate Reeves, it's been an awesome pleasure to have you on Whistleblower of the Week. Kate Reeves is not only an advocate and supporter of whistleblowers, she's also the International Liaison for Kohn Colapinto in the UK. Thank you, Kate. You are a treasure. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to read more whistleblower stories, go to www.whistleblowersblog.org. Music by Rachel Kilgore. Editing and booking by Anissa Sheikh and Victoria Thompson. And a special thanks to our sponsors, Whistleblower Network News.
Growing up, I think you'll find that it's just as hard to stand up tall as it was when you were small. The truth is hard.